Hi, Sharon. Thank you again for being here. It means a lot to me.
Well, thank you.
And as I said to you, I love your shirt. It's a good reminder to be heart-centered and think about love and kindness.
It's great. That's what it's for.
Well, I think reminders are important. I mean, I wasn't expecting to start there, but I think one of the biggest things I hear from folks is just how do I remember to be in a mindful mode or in a kindness mode?
Well, that is a challenge, I think, really for everybody, and sometimes we ritualize those efforts. I have people who tell me, like, when they're on a Zoom call, for example, and they see all the little faces in the little boxes, they will silently, before the meeting starts, just look at the different faces and think, "May you be happy, may you be peaceful," or something like that. Or in terms of mindfulness, there might be certain activities where we decide, you know what, I'm not going to multitask all the time, all day long. Like
Yeah.
for this cup of coffee or tea, I'm just going to be feeling the warmth of the cup and smelling the beverage and tasting it, and not also be checking my email at the same time. So it's just like sprinkling these moments
Mm.
of a very lived reality of mindfulness or loving kindness, and it helps, just these little moments here and there.
Yeah, bringing the practice into life and also still having a practice. I think it's getting more popularized to bring these moments into life, which is important because I think the other end of the pendulum has been you sit and you do this practice and then you get up and you do all your nasty things that you do in life. So it's nice that it's swinging the other way. And yet, I think you've offered a really, as you do, grounded, balanced voice too. We kind of need both.
Well, I need both as a person, and so I think we have to see what's realistic, and the challenge for us in some ways is for once not to do things in the hardest way possible.
Hmm.
I think we can accomplish a lot, in fact, just by those little moments, throughout the day. But are we, back to your first question, are we going to remember?
Yeah.
It's like one of the most famous messages about that came from the Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, "Don't pick up your phone on the first ring. Let it ring 3 times and breathe. Then you pick it up." I was once teaching in a financial firm in New York City, and I recommended that, and I looked up and I saw the complete panic on everyone's faces, and I said,
Mm.
"Okay, for you, maybe just twice. Let it ring
Yeah.
twice, You don't
Small
have to
steps.
let it ring 3 times." But realistically, am I gonna remember to let the phone ring 3 times in the middle of a pressured, crazy kinda day with lots of momentum toward being scattered and distracted? Not likely, but if I sat that morning in some formal dedicated period of meditation, I am much more likely to remember
Do you
throughout
have a
the day.
sense of what that is? Like, what is happening in those sits that just makes it easier for us to be that way during the day and not have to like actively think about it or do it? It's almost like the sitting turns into a way of being.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's ultimately the purpose of the sitting, is it's not
Yeah.
just a kind of isolated activity that can feel fantastic, sometimes, and not so fantastic other times, but, that's not the goal anyway. It's really about how it melds into our lives and changes us as a person. I think it does. It's almost like exercising a muscle or a series of muscles. Um, when we sit and we have an object of awareness, let's say it's the feeling of the breath, or in loving kindness meditation, it might be the silent repetition of certain phrases like, "May you be safe, may you be happy," as a kind of blessing or offering to ourselves and to others. Um, our minds will wander, we'll get distracted, we'll jump to the past, we'll jump to the future. And then comes a moment when we realize that. So we practice letting go and coming back. It's what one of my meditation teachers called exercising the letting go muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're at work, you're in conversation, you're somewhere and you find you're way distracted. You're talking to somebody, you're not really taking them in, you're not listening because you're somewhere else altogether. You realize that you can practice letting go and coming back. It's much more graceful. So learning how to begin again, learning that our thoughts are really thoughts. We don't have to take them all to heart
Mm-hmm.
and follow them out. We learn to cultivate some space. It doesn't mean that they're all irrelevant, or we're dismissing them, but you know, those moments when, like, right now I'm talking to you from Barre, Massachusetts, I'm way in
Mm-hmm.
the country, and that kind of thought where you think, I need to get an avocado, which means when you live here, you get in a car no matter the weather, and if you want like a really good avocado, you might have to drive an hour and 15 minutes to the nearest Whole Foods, and then halfway there you think, why am I in the car? Pouring rain, this thought just like captivated me. It took me over. We learn, it's like exercising that muscle of some space, some spaciousness, so that we can be empowered to choose. Do I want to follow this out? Do I want to let it go? And so many other kind of new habits or new ways of being are things we actually strengthen in that period of practice.
The spaciousness allows for making more artful decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
Less impulsive decisions.
yeah. I mean, one of the things we bring into the day, into those ordinary activities, is just an ability to pause, decide what we really want to see, happen. And so like my favorite definition of mindfulness actually came out of an article I read many years ago in the New York Times. It was about one of the very, very early pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. And this was a fourth grade classroom in Oakland, California. So the journalist asked one of the kids, he's in fourth grade, so he's like 9 or 10 years old. The journalist asked, "What is mindfulness? What is mindfulness?" And the kid replied, "Mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means." And I thought that's a great definition of mindfulness, because what does it imply? It implies, first of all, you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after it's built and it's escalated and you've sent the email and you've
Mm-hmm.
lashed out at the coworker. And it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger, because if we get consumed by the different emotions that come up, we're likely to hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really frustrating. But at the same time, if we hate what we're feeling and we're ashamed of it and we want to deny it and push it down, we get tighter and tighter and tighter till we explode. It just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, in that balanced place, recognizing what we're feeling, but not being lost in it, not hating it, space opens up and options may appear. Different creative solutions may appear. I like to think of that kid, for example, in that space thinking, hit someone in the mouth last week. Didn't work out that well.
Yeah.
Let me try this. And so it's not that we never act in response to something. We do, but it doesn't have to be so rote, so conditioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like speaking of conditioning, the kind of theme of this podcast is easing the impacts of trauma. And when there's been trauma, especially complex trauma, there's a lot of conditioning. Sometimes people pleasing, sometimes it's not safe to feel one's emotions. So many different things can come up with that. Can you give any recommendations as far as, for folks who have dealt with trauma or dealing with it? Is sitting, having a sitting practice, having a meditation practice appropriate? And are there certain kinds that are more appropriate?
It can be appropriate. I think ideally one is working with a teacher who has a great deal of flexibility, who's not doctrinaire. For example, um, in many lineages, they talk about sitting with your eyes closed, for example. Do you have to sit with your eyes closed? Actually, you don't. And there may be many situations where you find more balance if you're sitting with your eyes open, or you're doing something
Yeah.
like walking meditation, something like movement. Um, I did some amount of my intensive retreat practice in Burma, and I heard there was another place in Burma I never got to, but I heard it existed where the schedule was you sit for 5 minutes, then you walk for 5 minutes, then you sit for 5 minutes, and you walk for 5 minutes. Whereas I always ended up with the teachers who were like, let's sit for an hour, and like, which could be fine, but it may not be always appropriate, for everybody at
Hmm.
all times. And so having that kind of flexibility and understanding that, yeah, some of, I think, the work in those situations comes down to um, a kind of principle that is apparent in many situations where we're facing difficulty or some kind of pain. So I had a Burmese meditation teacher who we brought here to Barrie in 1984, um, to teach a 3-month silent retreat under his guidance. So he was like the only person I spoke to for 3 months because I sat at that retreat. And we brought him, never having met him before, because we heard he was a wonderful teacher. And he was a wonderful teacher, but he was also very strict, very fierce, very demanding. So one day in the meditation hall, he was doing questions and answers, and somebody asked him, how long should I be paying attention to physical pain before I move my attention to something that's easier to be with, listening to sound or something else in the body that's more comforting, that's more easeful? And I thought, his name was Sayadaw Pandita, I thought given his personality, he was going to say you should be with the pain until you fall over,
Hmm.
But to my shock, he said, don't be with it for very long. He said, be with the pain, be with something that's easier to be with. Be with the pain, be with something that's easier to be with. It's not that it's wrong to just be with the pain or be with the pain and be with the pain, but you'll likely get exhausted. So
Yeah.
why not build in balance all along the way? And I was so surprised. It's like you could have knocked me over, because he was the last kind of person in the world who would say something just to be comforting. It's like
Yeah.
he really believed in it. And we extrapolate that to emotional pain and painful memories, and we can get into kind of an over heroic mode. I think I've got to just get to the bottom of this or break through this, but really we need relief also.
Mm.
We need a break. We need to pace ourselves, and so that becomes an important principle in practice. And certainly in
Yeah.
those times when we're facing like a very challenging kind of uh, arising.
I love what you're talking about because it reminds me of like pendulation, which comes out like moving in and out of the sensation. Same thing with like the sitting and walking. And I think it's helpful for people to know that meditation isn't just this one rigid thing. Although I
Hmm.
think as Westerners, a lot of us are afraid that if we let ourselves ease up, we'll never be disciplined again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we have a really hard time with like figuring that out.
Yeah, no, I think it is very true, and it's for many people, it's part of a whole set of conditioning about it's too selfish to take care of yourself, or
Yeah.
give yourself a break. And it also reminds me of, I think like 6 years ago now, I was in the hospital with sepsis. I was very sick, and then I was, getting better, and I went for that first walk up and down the hospital corridors using a walker, and with a physical therapist by my side. And at one point, she said to me, "It's not a race, you know. You'll get
Mm.
further if if you allow yourself to take some breaks." And that became a kind of mantra for me. It's not a race.
Yeah.
It's like it actually works better. We make more progress.
Yeah.
if we can just give ourselves a break now and then. And so that's something to keep in mind.
I learned that lesson from yoga. Like doing less is actually you get further. Like you go deeper into a pose by the less you
Yeah.
do to
Yeah.
try to make it happen. And then it really came into my life. Like I started thinking about that. Like where can I do less and actually see more flow happen?
Yeah. And you said something, really, really important earlier about how difficult it is for us to feel our feelings
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And that's one of the reasons we speed up,
Yeah.
uh, is to not have to feel certain things. And I think that's also a place. It's funny because even though meditation as a practice feels like the most solitary thing in the world, maybe you do it all alone, maybe you do it with your eyes closed largely, or maybe not. But really, you get such a profound sense of connection with others, you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
and maybe we have an active community, a sense of community, or maybe it's just this deep knowing that we're a part of things, and we're not all alone in facing these complex feelings,
Mm.
and really difficult feelings, and that helps a lot too.
Do you think meditation can be a substitute for verbal therapy, or do you think people need both, or is it an individual question?
I think it's kind of an individual question, and some of it is just, what's realistic. Like, uh, I went to India at the age of 18, never having been in therapy, which is something I did later,
Mm,
when I came back. And there were many people there, like in those days, meditation techniques or yoga, even, were not that accessible. Like I was going to college in Buffalo, New York before I went to India. I wanted to learn how to meditate, and this was in 1970, early 1970 or even late 1969. And I looked around Buffalo, I just didn't see it anywhere.
yeah.
So I ended up creating this independent study project for the university and went to India. I asked to go to India to study meditation, and they said, okay. So I went off with my student loans and my scholarship, never having even been to California before. I'd been
Yeah.
to New York City, and many of the people I met there, like you had to really want to learn how to meditate. So that usually meant a great deal of suffering in your life,
Yeah.
one form or another, because it was such an outrageous thing, to like pick up and go to India or, wherever you ended up going. And so you were highly, highly motivated, usually by some history of pain. And it's for many people then, meditation was our primary path, but we weren't doing it in isolation. We had a community of friends, new friends. We had teachers,
Hmm.
so it was part of a package in a way. Um, these days, it's not that inaccessible, and people have the opportunity of combining modalities, and maybe they're experiencing meditation as a tool, and they're also going to therapy, or they have an active community, of people, like-minded people, not into meditation, but into healing
Hmm.
from something. And that's great, if that's what your life avails you of.
You don't think that like the struggle that you had to go through to travel, and how much you had to want it, and that we don't have that as much these days, um, makes it in a way it was super hard for you to go, but now it's really hard for us to like find that. I always say, I know you know where I'm going, like I always like appreciate that my parents gave me boundaries, because I knew when I really fought against them and I had to hurt them, that it was something I really wanted, because I hated to hurt them. And so like I think the the boundaries and things we have to fight through to get to something golden are so helpful. On the other end, we have this balance of so many more people, of course, can access this beautiful practice.
You know, that's something we talked about for years, like, whoa, you know, like, but first of all, it's what's real. It's out of our hands, you know,
Yeah,
and I think, you know, people are motivated, some by, you know, a lot of pain or suffering, some physical pain even, or psychological pain, some by just a really deep curiosity about life. You know, they want to live in a more meaningful way, a deeper way. And
yeah,
um so it's just an interesting time, you know,
yeah.
for exactly the reason you're talking about. Like, I don't know what this means, you know, like,
Just being with the question.
yeah.
Yeah. So as we're talking about, and as like so many people can listen to your story and probably already know like all the years of practice that you had, and you came back to the US kind of with a cohort of pretty well-known teachers, Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, but you became known as kind of the loving kindness one. And I was curious, like, why you think that's how you became known, or was it a conscious decision? I've sometimes heard like mindfulness practiced without loving kindness can be, that's not like how the Buddha intended it. That I don't know, I'm curious, like, if it was a intentional that you became known. Was it because you're the woman of the group? Was it something that you felt was important, that a lot of people went to mindfulness is everywhere, and did you see that there was like a gap in how Westerners were understanding the practice, that there wasn't enough of the loving kindness that was being spoken into the teaching? That was a lot, but wherever you want to go from
Yeah,
there.
no, I mean, I don't think what we created, you know, or what I did was like that clearly intentional in a lot of ways. You know, it's sort of like, I think as a quality, loving kindness is inherent in mindfulness. You can't really have mindfulness without certainly loving kindness and compassion for yourself, because just as an ordinary example, you're sitting, minding your own business, feeling your breath, and it's not 7,000 breaths before your mind wanders. Maybe it's two, you know, and then you're gone. How do you speak to yourself when you realize that? You know, how gently can you let go and come back and do it again and do it again? There's got to be some loving kindness in there. Or, you know, going back to what you brought up earlier, all kinds of things arise when we're meditating, some beautiful and sublime and amazing, and some really painful, you know. How do you not judge and put yourself down and, you know, be ashamed of what you're feeling? There's got to be loving kindness in there. It may not be spoken about explicitly, but it's there, you know. And to some degree, maybe that hasn't always been emphasized, but I think it's inevitably there. And so I see people struggle with the word mindfulness these days, and they say, well, maybe we should call it kindfulness, or call it
Mm,
warm mindfulness, or because mindfulness sounds so cold or clinical. Or certainly people like Ramdas, you know, and now Jack Cornfield emphasize loving awareness as the phrase,
mm,
you know. But loving kindness as a particular methodology, a separate, not removed, but, you know, its own distinct technique
mm.
of meditation, is something that I really feel I played a role in, you know.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, bringing like
Small
my
role, Sharon.
yeah, my first meditation retreat was in India when I'd gone, you know, with my uh, college program, through my college program. And it began January 7th, 1971. The teacher was S.N. Goenka, who is from Burma. He had just come back to India, and it was a 10-day, really a mindfulness retreat or an insight meditation retreat. But right at the end, almost as a kind of ceremonial way of saying goodbye, he taught a loving kindness meditation. And I thought, "Ooh, what's that one?"
Mm.
And I was always intrigued by it, and I felt like I really wanna learn how to do that in a systematic way, and I didn't actually get specific instructions, with a guide until I went to Burma in 1985, where I did this 3-month intensive period of loving-kindness meditation. And, that actually was my only practice for, like, the following 4 years.
Mm.
But, back to going to Burma, I was already a teacher, I came back to the States, I started teaching loving-kindness meditation, and, because it had been so important for me.
Yeah.
I didn't have a vision of the system or, like, the institution of Buddhism or anything. I just thought this was so important for me, even after 14 years of doing mindfulness practice. Um,
Well, maybe especially to
yeah,
after 14 years to have something like that strike you.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was amazing, and so that's what I was teaching, and uh, there was a lot of pushback. Speaking of gender,
Yeah.
like people were saying, "Well, that's just a feel good practice, or that's just to
Yeah.
have you indulge and whatever, and you're never going to learn wisdom that way." And looking back, I realized, oh, what they were saying was this kind of girly practice, like.
Yes.
But now, and in those days, mindfulness, I mean, there wasn't a lot of research, but when the research began, it was all about mindfulness. And now it's
Yes.
different. I feel like loving kindness or compassion, are really, there's a lot of heightened interest in those tools and using them for research and seeing what the results are and all kinds of different populations. And uh, so I feel rather grateful. And my first book, which came out in 1995, was called Loving Kindness. It was all about that practice. So that's, how that reputation began for me.
There's so much there. I just want to thank you for kind of making that distinction between loving observation or what was the word?
Loving awareness.
Loving awareness being different from like an active loving kindness practice. That's really helpful. I think there are ways that sometimes mindfulness, even if it's not wasn't meant to be, that it's taught or perceived as being very observational and a little sterile. So just reminding folks that that's a part of it, that is I think important, and then understanding that the loving kindness practice is this separate thing. I know that at times when I've committed to loving kindness practice, I've been like, I had the same feeling like, what was all the other stuff I was doing? I mean, in the end, what are we doing it all for? All for? Doesn't isn't the highest wisdom loving
Hmm.
kindness? Like, isn't that just it? Like it to me, it has felt like the most important practice that I could do. And not the forget the word you were saying, but like I mean, the highest insight we could have again is that spaciousness and unity and oneness and everything that love brings.
Yeah. And it's not, again, that it's absent in mindfulness practice at all. I think we are cultivating the same muscle, but it was also delightful just to spend time specifically looking at, connection and connecting more deeply to myself in a different way and connecting to others. They say the Buddha taught loving kindness meditation the first time is the antidote to fear,
Mm.
and for anybody who has that issue,
Yeah.
the kind of predominant motivating force in what we do, what we say, what we hold back from doing or saying. It's like a direct uprooting in a lot of ways of that habit, that tendency, and
And if you've been
um,
taught that the world is like unsafe, and if
yeah,
that's been your
yeah,
experience, as with trauma.
yeah. I mean, as you know, I'm sure so many of our conditioned responses were kind of smart adaptations at the time we took
That's
them
right.
up, but are maybe a little too rigid now or too rushed. It's like, well, I
Yeah.
don't want that to be the only way I react.
First, we have to realize, right? Like this is this thing that was helping us, it helped us survive for a time is now hindering growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, whew, what to do about
Yeah.
that?
And that's why,
How to let, yeah. I wanted to ask you about the phrases. Um, so first, the order. So I was listening, catching up on all your podcast, and I had forgotten because I don't you teach it this way that traditionally you're supposed to offer the phrases to yourself first.
Mhm.
I find a lot of people struggle, especially from that trauma survivor lens, because there's a lot of shame. So I've done it for so long. Here, embarrassingly admitting, um, to think of someone as easy to love
Mhm.
as a first. Is it wrong? Am I doing it wrong, Sharon?
No, you're doing it right, actually. You're doing it really right because the underlying principle of the practice is to do it in the easiest way possible.
Okay.
And that's why, over time we move through these categories, theoretically starting from what's easiest and then moving through things that are beings. I say beings because it doesn't have to be a human being, it could be a puppy or something, moving
Yeah.
through beings that are more difficult. So we come to all beings everywhere, right? So traditionally, we do begin with ourselves because apparently, in say the Buddha's time, 2,600 years ago, in another culture, it was easiest to offer love and kindness to yourself. And so the next category is a benefactor, someone who's helped us, someone who maybe we've never met them, but they've inspired us, or the texts say, this is the one, when we think of them, we smile.
Hmm.
And I have taught innumerable people who need to switch that order,
Yeah.
and that's the right thing to do because we always go back to the principle. Um, and sometimes people tell me I can't do loving kindness for myself until I'm up to like all beings everywhere. And then I pop up like a pop up ad on the
Hmm.
computer.
Yeah.
It's also a practice we can have some fun with. It's like you can play with it some ways like that. And Uh, but don't worry about the order.
Okay. Yeah. I had. So it's a benefactor, and then.
Yeah, so this is also over time. It's like you can't usually fit everyone in one session. It's way too much. But over time, we hit these
Okay.
different notes. It's ourselves, a benefactor, and then a friend. And sometimes I like to distinguish a friend who's doing well right now and then offer loving kindness to a friend who's not doing so well right now, who's struggling in some way. But it's ourselves, a benefactor, a friend, a neutral person, someone who we don't especially like or dislike. And this is often someone that plays some role in our lives, like maybe the same checkout person in the supermarket we tend to see now and then because it's just kind of fun and interesting to notice, oh, I feel a little differently about them today than I did a month ago.
Yeah.
Um, and then a difficult person. So this is also a place where that same principle comes to bear. They say don't start with the most like impossible person who's hurt you so badly or whose behavior from your point of view on the world stage is so terrible. Start with someone where there's a little bit of conflict, or a
Yeah.
little bit of distress and more slowly make your way over. And this is an instruction I find people often don't like. They think I have to, jump in the deep end, and it's not going to count until I'm really struggling and
Yeah.
sweating and crying. But it's not so. We want to do it in the easiest way possible because it's like building another muscle to understand deeply, almost in our bodies, what it feels like to have compassion for somebody and realize you're not giving in. You're not going to pretend that what they did or are doing doesn't matter. It's not like that. Or you're not going to
Yeah.
stop fighting their action, but you don't have to be coming from a place of hatred or fear. It takes a while to get there. And so you don't want to just jump in. But as I said, people often do. So it's ourselves, benefactor, friend or friends, neutral person, difficult person, and then all beings everywhere. And that's kind of the arc over time.
Yeah. I I've often skipped the benefactor, which is not good. I'm gonna fix that because it also reminds me of some of Patanjali's meditation advice. Like you can meditate on like a divine being, and it's that same feeling that like, and I do that in my life. Like as an active practice, I'll focus on like someone who's a quality that I want to build in myself. And so, like, I feel like this is very similar to that. And it's been very helpful for me to mature in different aspects of my personality. I can see this aligning with that. Another way that I switch up my phrases, I feel like everyone does this too, to like get your permission, but I wanted to get your take on this. For me, may I feels like this distance from like being, like I am. So I often say something more like recognizing myself like stepping into that place of safety, feeling the feeling of being safe right now, like and like making it more present that the feeling is here and not something that like I'm aspiring to. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's fine to do it in the level of feeling, but two things. One is, I think it's still good to have the phrase be something like may I or may you, because the idea is gift giving.
Okay.
It's offering, it's blessing.
Yeah.
And if you're actually saying I am safe, that's actually a different practice. That's more like an affirmation. And there's even research, I think, on the distinction of the practices. And that could be a fine practice, but it's different.
Interesting. Okay.
And the other thing is that they say, in terms of loving kindness, there are three things that any one of which might be predominant in the moment. One is the phrase, one is the sense of the recipient. So might be a visualization or just like a feeling of the recipient. And the third is the feeling. And the feeling is not always there,
Hmm.
you know. And it's fine to do what you're describing to see if you can inhabit the feeling, but you don't want it to be forced or to be a question of judgment,
Yeah.
like felt more yesterday.
Yeah.
Where'd it
Yeah.
go? And I personally, it's another one of my bugaboos. I have done so many hours of this practice feeling nothing was happening.
Hmm.
I didn't have some great wave of like warmth or bliss, only to look
Yeah.
back and realize something was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is such a big point that if people feel like if they're not feeling it, then they're not doing it right.
Yeah.
And a lot can be happening without the feeling that something's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the place it counts is in our life. That's where we'll see it. And I have a
Yeah.
friend who took me out to lunch one day in New York, and he said to me, "This is going to be a kind of confessional lunch." And I said, "Okay, what are you confessing?" And he said, "Well, my practice, whether I'm on retreat or sitting at home for about 3 years now, has been loving kindness." And he said, "I just have to tell you that my experience sitting now, 3 years later, is not all that different from what it was when I started, but I'm like a completely different person."
Yeah.
I'm different with myself when I make a mistake. I'm different with my family. I'm different with my community. I'm different ethically. And then he looked at me and he said, "Is that enough?" I said, "Yeah, I kind of think that's enough, you know?" But we don't tend to look at our lives
Yeah.
as the place where the changes are happening. We look at that, 15 minutes a day when we're sitting formally. We think, I'm still getting sleepy. I'm still getting anxious. It's not working. But it
Hmm.
is working.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's really important distinction. It's like that it might not be in the sitting practice that the effects are showing up. There might be this lag time or after, like, yeah, that's powerful. And also sometimes we're very immediate, um, and it's helpful to look over the changes over years.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, rather than I still got angry this afternoon. Yeah, but overall, over the
Yeah,
past years that you've been sitting.
definitely. And if you still get angry this afternoon, it takes some perspective to do this. But if your wave of engulfing anger used to last a day and it's now lasting 15 minutes, that is a huge change in the quality of your
Huge.
life. But those 15 minutes don't feel great, so it's very disappointing and we think I failed and, all that stuff. But give it, some perspective. Like that's how change actually happens. We still get lost, we still get consumed, we still get overwhelmed, but not for as long.
Yeah.
And it will just continue receding.
Yeah. Do you think that that's okay, so obviously you were drawn to meditation to for your own healing, if
Yeah.
I understand correctly. And then I'm sure through going to all these incredible countries and studying with all these incredible teachers that, and learning what this practice really is from these different lineages and perspectives, it became so much more than a personal journey of healing. Obviously, it has for you. What's your perspective on like the purpose, if there is a purpose of meditation practice? Is it self-betterment? Is it world betterment? Is it enlightenment? Or are those things actually enlightenment? Like, eh, is there somewhere we're going? Are we already here?
Well, I mean, I think you can approach it in a lot of different ways. I think that, yeah, I mean, like, enlightenment is also defined differently. Like if if you go to some classical, like Buddhist understanding of it, it's having a mind and therefore a life free of being overcome by greed, hatred, and delusion, or confusion. And that sounds like a good thing. Obviously, the closer we get to that kind of freedom, the more impactful it is in our relationships, in our family, in our community, and ultimately the world, so that they're not actually separate. You could say meditation practice is for the purpose of training our attention
Hmm.
to be more present, to be less, like a lot of evolutionary biologists will say we have like a negativity bias. We're trained to look for danger, threat, what's wrong. And that it actually takes some retraining to take in what's good and
Yeah.
what's available. And it just like fills out the picture. It's not denial, but it's a more complete picture of life and what's presenting itself. So, we can train our attention to be more inclusive in that way and more present and more inclusive of others. We might, that's why I love, like in loving kindness meditation, that neutral person, especially if it's someone you do run into now and then, because that checkout person in the supermarket, for example, is the kind of person we usually look right through.
Yeah.
We objectify, we kind of ignore. And what we're doing in the loving kindness meditation is we're actually, in effect, looking at them instead of through them.
Yeah.
So when we train our attention to be more present and more inclusive in all these different ways, many things emerge, like greater compassion, more generosity, a different level of ethics, way of being in the world, not wanting to harm other people. And because we see it's also harming ourselves. And uh, more effectiveness, actually. There's more power when our minds aren't scattered all over the place. And um, so the effect on the world, I think, is a natural outcome of training our attention to be different.
Mm,
So it's not like we're saying, I've got to vanquish all my, difficult emotions and somehow get this thin veneer of compassion and hold on to it and never make a mistake. Or it's not like that at all. But the more we train our attention, the more naturally we'll find our lives are different. Of course, that affects everyone around us.
yeah. Some people do think that when others are like peaceful or, you know, generally happy during such really hard, tumultuous times, that we're not like seeing the pain, but that's not what the definitely not what the practice is for. And I don't agree with that, but what would you say to that?
Well, it could be, but that someone is doing that, but it's not
You can definitely
inherent.
practice to numb out if without the right teacher or ethical training with it. Do you, and these are throwing a few questions at you at once, but like, do you need some studies alongside?
I mean, that could help, but uh, I think we do tend to wake up on our own when our motivation is sincere and we keep
Mm,
practicing.
yeah,
But it wouldn't be unknown for somebody to use a meditation practice to avoid,
right.
looking at what's painful. But if you have an understanding from the beginning that, that's not the goal and are reminded of that, it does fade away. And it's no one's meditation practice is all glorious and blissful,
Yeah.
all the time. So it'll fade away anyway,
It's very true.
in the reality of it. But I think the other part of your question has to do with resilience and where resilience really comes from. And it's like me, thinking walking down that hospital corridor was a race.
Mm,
We actually can't function forever, especially if we're in service to others or some mission of some kind, trying to make a difference in the world. You look at the level of burnout of
yeah.
people who are caregivers, either in their personal lives or professional lives, some ways on the front lines of suffering, trying to help ease it. Activists, trying to make a difference in the world. The level of burnout is considerable.
Yeah.
And one element of that seems to be feeling it's too selfish, it's too self absorbed to do the things for yourself
Yeah.
that would actually help build resilience.
Yes.
And so how realistic is it to go on and on and on and on in the face of suffering without ever, doing the things that help you get perspective or give
Hmm.
yourself a break or even just your nervous system to,
Yeah. I mean, I feel
recharge.
so strongly about what you just said, especially in activism and caregiving, because I think we can do a lot of unintentional harm and replicate a lot of poor power dynamics and cycles if we start to become bitter and burnt out. When we think we're helping others, it can become resentful and we can end up harming folks who might be doing better without our help. So that's been a big, everything you said there is just, I find very, very important to remember. And for some people that are in the helping fields, and I'm speaking to myself, right? It's like sometimes we have to remember that if we can't do it for ourselves, we can do it with that knowing that it's actually going to be better for others.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, um, Sharon, what's next for you? How many books have you written?
I've written 13 books.
I've written like a one book, I've written two books. One is a kind of like a coaching life purpose planner, and I've written a trauma informed yoga book. And whew, I'm tired. you, you are a prolific author. Like I'm just, yeah. Are there more? What's in your future? What's coming up for you?
I don't have a book. Well, I have a children's book coming out next year sometime that, um,
Wow.
there is based on loving kindness, which was my first book, and there's an author, a co-author, and an illustrator.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, so that's happening. I don't have another book idea or contract or so
You just write them as they come.
mostly, I mean, some books I was like deeply passionate about, like the book Faith I wrote, you know.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you,
Um,
like, of those, which are the ones that stand out that you'd recommend to folks? Yeah.
well, I'd say Faith,
Yeah. Yeah.
and depending on what you're interested in terms of meditation, loving kindness is all about that kind of meditation. I wrote a book called Real Happiness some years later, which has a lot of different kinds of meditation in it, mindfulness, sitting, walking, loving kindness, all kinds of different things. And it's really a guide to either taking up or renewing a meditation practice. And so that one was fun. I This has sort of been the year of the audio book for me. I recorded Loving Kindness, which never had an audio version. That's done. I did Finding Your Way, which was my last book, my most recent book. And then my second book was called The Heart as Wide as the World. That's been
Yes.
reissued. That came out in '97, I think. And I'm doing an audio version of that. I'm recording it in October. That had an audio version, but it was abridged. And so this will be an unabridged version. I think that's the last audiobook of
Mm.
my current work, that.
Yeah, people love audiobooks now. I'm one of those as a mom and busy
Uh-huh.
working mom, and I can stick the earbuds in and wash dishes and listen. And it's a real gift, right? If we can't just sit down with the pages. Um, I'm so excited about the children's book. I hope you'll be doing some events around that. Maybe.
Maybe,
Uh,
maybe.
I'd love to bring my daughter, and yeah,
How old is your daughter?
she's 5.5.
Oh, yeah, it's the perfect age.
And she's, interested in what mommy does, and she'll sit and she does some breathing. We just keep it lightly, but it's around the house, so it's a part of her life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's great.
Are you inspired with your book ideas when you're sitting? Like, I know a lot of people, including myself, sometimes like as soon as you sit down to be quiet, like creativity, ideas, all these things start to come out. Does that happen for you, or do you have a separate time for that?
No, it does happen for me that way, and I used to say, and it's still true, the best kind of writing would, appear in my mind 2 times. One is when I first woke up in the morning, because
Yep.
the sensor is not yet woken up, and the second was when I was meditating, and I don't sit down with the intention, "Oh, let me figure it out, how this chapter is gonna end," or something, but it does just come
And
sometimes.
you allow that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
I don't
nice.
usually write it down. Some people write things down, but I usually just say, "Remember this one,"
That's the
and it works.
thing. And you have a trust that it'll be there.
Yeah, so far it's there.
I think that's something actually that meditation practice can help with. I have some like anxiety around forgetting, especially since becoming a mom. It seems like a lot of my brain went to mush. But I do find the more relaxed I am, the more peaceful I am, the more even like being with even before I had my kid, just being very busy, a busy person. When I found love, I actually noticed after my partnership that my memory got better.
Interesting. That's very
So
interesting.
yeah, there's something about just trusting and relaxing. as we talk about all the things that meditation can do. So, folks wanting better memory. I know we're getting sort of to the end of our hour here. Um, what I mean, I think I know, how to put this. Here you are, you started 69, we're in 2024. Um, you've left us a great body of wisdom, and really made a huge impact, especially in the realm of loving kindness and the importance of this practice. Um, do you feel like that's your legacy to the world? Do you feel that there's something else, like if you have a message to send to listeners?
I think it's my legacy, and also the retreat center, which I am next door to right now,
Yes.
through the woods. The Insight Meditation Society is a flourishing institution, we started it in 1976. So we're heading up toward our 50th anniversary, which is astonishing,
I mean, if people have any idea about running a center like that and what it takes to keep it going
It's
through
something,
decades and
it's really, yeah.
yeah. And so I have it on I haven't actually been there and I would like to do a week long. So I was looking for the 2025. I think they're about to come out or maybe just did.
It's
So
just come out for registration, yeah.
yeah. So I'm gonna, that's one of the things that I want to do in the next year, finally. So I'm very, very excited for that. And I urge people to take a look at your offerings there. And I know you're doing so many offerings online now. Um, you did a really cool conversation series with my friend Reggie Hubbard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was really special. I caught some of that on like
Yeah,
eldership, and
yeah,
that was really beautiful. And so I know the online, we've moved somewhat online, and that's again a really cool way to collaborate, talk to different people, and spread the teachings.
yeah.
Where else can people find you, and where can we send them to learn more
Uh,
about you?
sure. Well, my website is just SharonSalzberg.com. You have to spell Salzberg with an E, Salzberg, and spell check will try to change it to a U, which is wrong. Um, and, it should all be on there, all the information about my schedule and about my podcast and, things like that.
Which
So
I love, the fireside chats,
thank you.
and
Yeah. Mhm.
I went deep into the archive, 2015.
Oh, gosh. Well, I
Yeah.
just interviewed Reggie, actually. I don't know when it's coming up, but
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, you have quite a number of people on there that I know. I think you have, um, did you have Jacoby Ballard on there? I think
no, but
so.
I know her. I've known her
Oh,
or
okay.
him, actually, for years.
And Angel Kiddo
Kiddo Williams.
Williams. Yeah, just great, great folks. So people should check out your podcast and buy your books. And Sharon, you're it. You are it. I said earlier, being around, people who have the qualities that I want to embody. You know, that's a very important practice for me. So thank you for spending this time with me, and with the listeners, and for just bringing your really beautiful, grounded energy into the world. It is absolutely magnificent and is such a gift.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for all your work.
Thanks, Sharon.